"Excuse me, sir. This area is for business class passengers only." The flight attendant's voice was steady, not loud, not harsh, yet it was as sharp as a thin blade, slicing through the quiet atmosphere of the aircraft cabin. All eyes turned to the first row where an old, silver-haired man was sitting upright in seat 1A. No vest, no tie, no shiny watch. He wore a light blue shirt with a frayed collar, with a light grey cardigan layered over it. At his feet was a faded canvas backpack, its seams coming undone. No one saw anything about him that seemed to belong here. No one, except for the man himself. He didn't answer right away. He just lifted his head to look at the young woman standing on 10-centimeter high heels, her hair in a neat bun, wearing dark red lipstick, her name tag gleaming, Brianna L. "What did you say?" he asked again, his voice low and soft as the wind. "May I see your ticket again, sir?" Brianna smiled, but her eyes were not smiling. He pulled a paper-printed ticket from his inner pocket, the kind few people use these days, and handed it to her. "Business class. Varian Flight 702, Seat 1A. The flight attendant glanced at it, then furrowed her brow. "Perhaps this is a system error," she said, while her eyes discreetly scanned the man from head to toe, as if searching for a sign of forgery. A male passenger behind them let out a small laugh. "Sir, are you sure you didn't wander into the wrong cabin?" A few people pressed their lips together, a few let out soft chuckles. The old man said nothing. He opened his backpack, took out an old leather wallet, and pulled out a membership card, a diamond card, the airline's highest tier with over 300,000 flight miles. The card was frayed at the corners, but it was clearly not something bought online. At that moment, the atmosphere in the cabin suddenly turned cold. But Brianna maintained her smile. "We will need to verify this. Could you please stand up and wait outside for a moment, sir?" He still didn't move. His hand tightened slightly around the strap of his backpack, but his voice remained even. "You want me to leave the place I paid to sit just because my appearance doesn't resemble those who sit in seat 1A? That question needed no answer. It just hung in the air, touching something deeper within everyone who was witnessing the scene. A young woman in the third row quietly raised her phone. She started a live stream. The image of the silver-haired old man being questioned for sitting in the wrong seat began to spread, while the man remained seated as if he were waiting for something no one dared to look at, directly the truth. It all seemed like it was just a small misunderstanding, a minute of embarrassment that would pass. A simple apology would be enough. But no. What happened next wasn't a mistake, it was a system. A system always ready to reject, to exclude, to deny simply because a person doesn't look like what they think is deserving. And that man, the one looked down upon even after showing all his proof, the one being pushed out of the cabin of the very airline he had built with his own youth, was the founder of Varian Skies Airline. That flight didn't just take off late. It had unleashed a storm. And he, the man in seat 1A, would not let it pass in silence like all the times before. His name was Elias Grant, 68 years old. No one remembered his face. No employee recognized his voice, though they might have heard it in hundreds of meetings. because 5 years ago, when Elias resigned as chairman of the Virion Skies Group, he chose to disappear from the media, from every news article. He didn't want to be a monument. He wanted to live like a real passenger, like the very people who had helped him build an aviation empire over 3 decades. When he was young, he used to sleep under his desk at the cargo terminal. The first 10 years were just to prove that economy-class passengers also deserve to be treated like first-class ones. But now, as he returned, no one remembered that philosophy. The aircraft door closed behind him. He was asked to leave seat 1A with an outward gentleness, but one full of insinuation. "We're sorry, sir. We need to recheck." No one pushed him, but he understood clearly the feeling of being denied even after presenting all the evidence. And what hurt him the most was not being asked to leave, but the way everyone let it happen. No one objected. No one stood up, except for a young woman in the 3rd row, who was secretly broadcasting the entire scene on her phone. Her eyes met his just before he stepped out. It was the only gaze that held no doubt. Elias wasn't angry, but inside, something smoldered like an old sciatic nerve pain that flared up every cold season. The pain of a system he had once built, which now no longer recognized who he was. In the waiting lounge, he was seated in a quiet corner. A young ground staff member, whose name tag read Kimberly, brought him a glass of water. She paused for a moment when she saw his name on the ticket. "You're Elias Grant?" she asked softly, almost not believing her eyes. He just smiled and nodded gently. "You're the first person in 4 years to recognize my name." She bowed her head. I received a Virion scholarship back in my first year of college. It's thanks to that scholarship that I got a job here." Elias said nothing, but his gaze softened. A part of him that had been clenched tight suddenly relaxed. I'm sorry for what just happened," Kimberly added, her voice catching. "They should have checked more carefully, but they didn't think an old man like me could be sitting in seat 1A. Elias finished for her, not with bitterness, but simply stating a fact. She didn't reply. The air grew heavy. Elias leaned back in the waiting chair. He looked towards the large window where flights were continuously taking off, like dreams departing one after another. The sky was still blue. The planes still flew. But something inside him had changed. Years ago, he used to teach his staff, passengers don't buy tickets, they buy respect. But now, he had bought a business class ticket, and what he received was suspicion. This pain didn't come from a single word. It came from the 1,000 silences of systems that had learned to judge others by their appearance alone. He gently took an old notebook from his backpack, a place where he still jotted down notes while sitting in airports. The last line he had written, from 4 months ago, read, "To understand a system, don't ask the manager, ask the person who was rejected by it." Today, he was that person. And he knew, even though he no longer held any title in the corporation, he still had one thing no one could take away: the right to speak the truth. He glanced at the clock. 2:45 p.m. In the next 15 minutes, the entire airline industry would have to relearn an old lesson. Respect is not a reward. It is the first condition for any flight to take off. Insults sometimes don't come from words. They come from looks, from the very slight furrow of a flight attendant's brow upon seeing a man in an old sweater sitting in the first seat, from the glance over the shoulder, followed by a slight shake of the head from the man in a suit in seat 2B, as if to say, "Another one in the wrong seat." From Brianna's smug, tight-lipped smile as she returned with a tablet in her hand, "The system doesn't have your name in seat 1A. No one shouted at Elias. No one called him a fraud. But every pair of eyes on that flight said the same thing: "You don't belong here." Brianna turned to her young colleague Marcus, who had just emerged from the galley with a cup of coffee. She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes. "That old guy must have snuck into the first-class cabin. Our airline has gotten really lax lately." Marcus chuckled lightly, setting the cup down on a side table. "Trying to cause a scene to get on the news. There are a lot of old guys like that." That comment needed no agreement. It slid through the cabin like a thin, uncomfortable wisp of cold air. A female passenger blonde, wearing a luxurious cardigan, pulled out her phone and started recording. Her eyes were no longer curious, but half incredulous, half annoyed. "Another person demanding privileges they don't actually have," she whispered to the person next to her. All of this happened in less than 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, not a single person asked Elias, "Do you need any help, sir?" from seat 1A. Elias sat still. His hand rested lightly on his backpack. His gaze was not avoidant, but not defiant either. He just looked straight ahead, not at anyone, but through the facade of how people treat each other when they think they won't be caught. He looked at the very thing he had tried to build, an airline culture that respected every passenger. Now he saw it collapsing, not from a lack of rules, but from a lack of heart. At the end of the cabin, a young passenger, the girl in seat 3B, quietly adjusted the angle of her phone's camera. Her eyes flashed with disapproval. She didn't know who the man was, but something about his composure made it impossible for her to look away. She saw that he was not afraid, not angry, not bowing his head, but in his eyes there was a thin mist, a sadness that couldn't be spoken. And then he took out his phone and placed it on the table. The screen lit up clearly, displaying the flight code, the business class ticket, and the name Elias Grant. Brianna glanced at it, but just shook her head. "People fake this stuff all the time out there," she said, as if trying to protect a belief she herself was no longer sure of. "So you don't need to check the system again." Elias's voice was low, not demanding, but simply a question. "We are following procedure," she replied. A confident statement, but that confidence didn't stem from truth. It stemmed from habit. A long moment passed. The silence dragged on. The flight had not yet closed its doors. The boarding complete sign had not yet lit up. But the entire cabin felt as if it were frozen. Elias sighed, not because he was tired, but because he was used to being judged. 40 years ago, he had been kicked out of a diner for wearing work clothes. 20 years ago. He was denied a meeting with an investor who thought he was the water delivery guy. And today, at 68, people still treated him as if a person's worth was measured only by the brand of shoes they wore. A junior flight attendant, Marcus, hesitated. "Should I check the system one more time?" Brianna brushed it aside. "No need. Don't let people take advantage of our leniency." Elias turned to look at Marcus, not angry, not blaming. He just said, "Do you know what the scariest thing about prejudice is? It makes good people stay silent." Marcus didn't answer. That sentence hung in the cabin heavier than any luggage on that flight. At the same time, the phone of the girl in seat 3B was buzzing incessantly. The live stream's viewership was climbing. Comments poured in. But he provided all the proof. Why don't they just check the system? Just because he's not wearing a suit, Elias still hadn't left his seat. But people started to feel that their own seats were no longer as comfortable as before. Not because of a lack of space, but because of a lack of justice. The cockpit door opened with a hard click. From inside, Captain Rhodes, a tall man with salt and pepper hair slicked back, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, stepped out with a busy and annoyed expression. He didn't look around. He didn't ask what was happening. He just glanced at the old man sitting in seat 1A, then turned to Brianna. "Isn't this settled yet?" "He insists he has a business-class ticket," Brianna said quickly, her voice firm. "But his name isn't in the system." Captain Rhodes nodded, without asking further, without requesting a check. He walked up to the aisle, standing in front of Elias, his voice low like a command. "Sir, I've been informed that you are in the wrong seat. We need you to cooperate and move to the economy cabin so the flight can depart on time." Not a single greeting, not a single attempt at verification, just a curt command, coming from a man accustomed to authority, and now using it as a way to save time. Elias looked up, straight into Rhodes's eyes. "You haven't even checked my ticket," he said, his voice calm. "And I have provided all my documents. I am not causing a disturbance. I am sitting in the exact seat I purchased." Rhodes tightened the strap of his watch. He wasn't used to being contradicted, especially by an old passenger in a sweater. "Security will be called if you don't cooperate immediately," he said, his voice cold. The atmosphere in the cabin grew as tense as a guitar string. No one said a word, but all eyes were following every movement. The live stream from seat 3B had now surpassed 2,000 viewers. Comments continued to update. "The pilot won't even check. A blatant abuse of power. He's being humiliated because of his appearance." Meanwhile, Brianna stood behind Rhodes with her arms crossed, her eyes filled with triumph. To her, this was no longer about a seat, it was a test of authority. She wanted to prove she was right, not with the truth. But by successfully pushing the old man out of the cabin, Elias still didn't get up. He opened his phone, activated the recording mode, and held it up to eye level. His voice came out steady. "I, Elias Grant, am being asked to leave my business class seat, a seat I purchased despite having presented my ticket, membership card, and valid ID. Flight Virion 702, June 15th, 2:47 p.m. Gate D12. I am making this recording not to protect myself, but to protect those who have no voice. Rhodes turned his face away. Brianna let out a faint smile. A recording won't change anything, sir. Elias didn't look at her. He only said, sometimes what makes people fall isn't the truth, but the refusal to look at it. 10 minutes later, 2 security officers boarded the plane, a man broad-shouldered and calm, named Jonas, and a woman whose eyes still looked hesitant, named Aria. They asked to check his documents. Elias presented everything this time, including the booking confirmation email from the loyalty department, his personal ID number in the long-term customer system, and a digital copy of the credit card used for payment. Jonas took almost 2 minutes to review everything. Then he turned to Brianna, his voice cold. The documents are all perfectly valid. Seat 1A is correct. Is there any reason why he was asked to leave? Brianna stammered. His name isn't in the system. Maybe he used some way to manipulate. That sentence landed like a stray gunshot in the middle of a peaceful party. Aria looked up, her eyes suddenly brightening as if she had just realized something. A female passenger from behind blurted out, "What did she just say? He used some way. What do you mean by that?" Another passenger stood up. "We saw him present all his documents. If there's still doubt, why not check the system instead of making accusations?" The atmosphere shifted. Every ego was now turning itself into evidence. Elias slowly stood up, not to leave, but to look directly at everyone. "A system error. I can understand. Miscommunication. I can forgive. But when your egos are stronger than the truth that is no longer a mistake, that is organized arrogance." Aria clenched her fists, looking at Jonas. She turned to Elias, gently. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grant. We will reprocess the entire verification procedure. Please, have your seat." Elias said nothing, just gave a slight nod. But that flight, though it hadn't yet taken off, had already veered off course. And the first collision didn't come from the sky. It came from the oversized egos of those who refused to listen to the truth. The cabin door opened again. But this time, it didn't just let in the air of the airport. It was the retreat of dignity under the pressure of what was called procedure. Jonas, the security officer, sighed, his voice unable to hide his bewilderment. "Mr. Grant, to avoid any further tension, we suggest you step outside and wait for a few minutes while we check with the ground staff." A seemingly polite invitation. But behind it was something familiar to Elias. "We're not sure you're telling the truth, but we also don't want to make a scene." He didn't protest. He didn't argue. He just stood up quietly. His right hand gripped the strap of his backpack tightly. His posture was still straight, but his back seemed a little more stooped as he stepped into the narrow aisle between the rows of seats. Each step felt like he was treading on days of old when he was a welcome guest in every cabin, every airport, every boardroom. The girl in seat 3B took out her earbuds. She was about to stand up, but it was too late. Elias had already passed, and his eyes, in the moment they met hers, were not sad, just empty. Upon reaching the cabin door, Elias turned back to look at the cabin. A brief moment, but anyone paying attention could feel something very different. No one clapped, no one said sorry, no one called for him to come back. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a world accustomed to excluding anything that doesn't fit the standards it creates for itself. And the deepest pain wasn't in the wrongful act, but in the fact that it was carried out so smoothly, so reasonably, and with no one objecting. Elias was led down the jet bridge toward gate D12. No one walked with him. There was only the sound of his backpack's wheels rattling on the floor. The sound of airport announcements echoed from a distance, calling other passengers' names. Life went on, as if the insult that had just occurred wasn't worth pausing to think about. At the end of the jet bridge, he sat down on a bench. No one paid him any attention. He suddenly looked like any other old man who had mistaken his flight time, missed his plane, or couldn't understand technology. A ground staff member, Raymond Boone, wearing a blue vest with neatly combed hair and a gleaming metal name tag, approached with a professional demeanor. "Mr. Grant, I'm the manager for Gate D12. I was informed of your situation. I apologize for the inconvenience." Inconvenience. Elias repeated the word, as if tasting its bitterness in his mouth. "We're prepared to arrange another flight for you, or assist with a transfer to the economy cabin on this one." Raymond said this in a monotone voice, not exactly dismissive, but the voice of someone who didn't believe the error was with the system. "My ticket is business class. Why should I have to move down? We couldn't find your name on the list." Raymond replied, "We suspect the system was altered by someone. I bought my ticket 3 weeks ago. I am a Diamond member. I presented all my proof. The mistake is not mine, but everyone has treated me as if I were a liar." Elias lifted his head. His voice was no longer gentle, but a statement of fact. Raymond paused for a beat, but then he sighed. "We need you to cooperate. You're obstructing the procedure." Elias looked straight into the man's eyes. His own eyes were not angry, just quiet and mournful, like an old lamp that once shone brilliantly, now covered by hundreds of invisible layers of dust called procedure. "I'm not obstructing any procedure," he said. "I am giving you all a chance to look at the procedure itself." From behind, a woman's voice rang out. "Excuse me, but I saw the whole thing. He wasn't causing any trouble at all, and all of his documents were valid." Everyone turned. It was the young woman from seat 3B, now off the plane. She held up her phone, the screen showing the ongoing live stream. Over 5,000 people were watching. Raymond's expression faltered. "And you are?" "I'm a passenger and a witness," she said, her eyes never leaving Elias. "And I don't intend to let this end without anyone being held accountable." Elias gave a slight nod, a gesture that was both thankful and heartbreaking. Someone had spoken up, but that didn't make him feel any less alone, because to push someone out of a place where they belong, it doesn't take much malice. It just takes enough people remaining silent. The storm didn't start in the sky. It started with a phone trembling slightly in the hands of the girl in seat 3B. The network signal was stable. The airport lighting was clear enough, and every word, every look, every silence from those who had turned their backs on Elias Grant had been recorded. The young woman's name was Lena Carter, a final-year law student, interning at a human rights organization. She hadn't intended to film, but in the sad, terrifyingly calm eyes of the silver-haired old man, she saw something very familiar, the helplessness of a once respected person, now forced to prove his most basic right to sit in the seat he had paid for. The moment Elias was led out of the cabin, Lena started the live stream. You are watching a business-class passenger being forced to leave his seat with no evidence other than his appearance not meeting the standard. Within 3 minutes, the live stream hit 1,000 viewers. In 10 minutes, it was trending on Twitter with the hashtag #GateD12, which was quickly replaced by a more powerful one, #respect1A. Comments flooded in like a waterfall. Valid ticket, valid ID, and still kicked out. Why? I used to be an airport employee. You can tell by looking at him that he was once a high-ranking official. The entire flight crew couldn't be bothered to verify properly what is happening at Varian Airlines. At Varian's communications office, Jamie Holloway, head of the social media department, had just put down her coffee when she saw hundreds of tags appearing on her alert dashboard. She furrowed her brow. What is this #respect1A? Who's live from Denver Airport? She enlarged the screen. The first image made her sit bolt upright in her chair, a silver-haired man in a grey cardigan being escorted out of an airplane cabin. That person was none other than the founder of Varian Skies, Elias Grant. "Oh my God," she uttered, then immediately picked up the phone. In the corridor of Gate D12, Elias was still sitting quietly on a bench. The young woman, Lena, approached him. She was still holding her phone, but her expression had shifted from indignant to resolute. "Mr. Grant, I hope you'll permit me to say this. If you don't want to speak up, I will speak for you." Elias looked at her, tilting his head slightly. "I recorded the entire incident. I'm live streaming, and now thousands of people are seeing what they usually ignore every day." Elias didn't react, but his hand loosened its grip on the backpack strap. He spoke as if asking himself, "Will people listen if no one shouts?" Lena answered immediately, "People just need someone to show them that they aren't the only ones who have ever been treated as if they don't exist." Inside Varian's Chicago headquarters, the current CEO, Avery Layton, was in an online meeting when he received an urgent alert. Media explosion. Business class passenger facing discrimination. It might be Mr. Elias. Avery didn't believe it at first. He opened the video. When he saw the image of Elias, his mentor, his predecessor being led out of the cabin like a delinquent passenger, his eyes suddenly blurred. "Stop the meeting," he said. "Get me a connection to Gate D12 immediately. I want to speak directly with Elias." Meanwhile, at the boarding gate area, Raymond Boone, the supervisor, was receiving a call from the senior operations office. The voice on the other end was cold. "Hold your position. Do not make any further decisions. The chairman has just been notified. Raymond's face paled. He turned to look for Elias and suddenly saw that a group of passengers had gathered around him. Many were live streaming. There were even freelance reporters, people always ready to capture a moment of social breakdown. A middle-aged passenger said loudly, "That man wasn't causing trouble. We saw it clearly. If he's the founder of the airline, what do you people think you're doing?" Raymond started to respond, but looking at the cameras pointed at him, he knew any word spoken now could be a knife turned back on himself. Elias's phone vibrated. A message appeared on the lock screen. "Avery Layton, I'm watching. I am so sorry. Please give us a chance to make this right." Elias looked at the words. Then he turned to Lena. "Do you know what saddens me the most?" "What is it, sir?" "I'm not angry about being removed from the cabin. I'm hurt that after 40 years of building a system, it can still so easily turn its back on me just because I wasn't wearing the kind of shirt they're used to seeing." His gaze at that moment was no longer that of a mistreated passenger. It was the gaze of a father seeing the child he had created, had forgotten its roots. Gate D12 was no longer just a waiting area. It had become an impromptu stage where all eyes were on a man with no title, no position, but who was teaching an entire system about something it had forgotten. Silence also has power. When the call from CEO Avery Layton was connected, his voice came through Elias's handheld phone, trembling slightly with pressure. "Elias, this is getting out of control. The media is. I can't believe this happened. I'm sorry." Elias didn't answer right away. He sat on the plastic bench, one hand resting lightly on his knee, the other holding the phone as if talking to an old relative. "You weren't the one who had me escorted off the plane," he said slowly. "But you are the one who inherited a legacy, and then let it fade from memory." Avery was silent. Elias continued, "I don't need an apology. I need action. Not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been looked at the way I was looked at today." No one heard the entire call, but just by looking at Lena's expression as she sat opposite him, and the way the surrounding passengers began to whisper amongst themselves, everyone understood he didn't need to shout. He didn't need to slam the table. He just needed to speak the truth in a voice just loud enough that people could not ignore it. Just then, an older passenger with salt and pepper hair and a red tie stepped forward. He extended a hand. "I'm Tom Delaney, a loyal Virion customer for the past 9 years. You once signed a thank you letter to me in 2014. Today, if you are not allowed back into the business class cabin, I will be leaving this flight, and I believe others will do the same." A woman beside him nodded. "Me too. The way they treated you is how they could treat any of us." The consensus spread as quickly as ripples on water after someone drops a truth into it. In the midst of this, Raymond Boone, the supervisor, received another internal call from a senior level. "No one is to make a decision regarding Mr. Elias without direct orders from the CEO." Raymond turned pale and retreated. He understood this battle was no longer in his hands, and Elias's silence, which he had earlier mistaken for surrender, turned out to be the very thing controlling the entire storm. Meanwhile, Short clips from Lena's live stream had spread across Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Reddit. One of the most shared clips showed Elias pulling out his phone, filming the screen of his flight ticket, then looking up at the camera and saying, "I don't need special privileges. I just need to be treated like anyone else who has paid in full with basic respect." Just one sentence, over 400,000 views in 2 hours. The comments below were filled with similar stories. "I was once mistaken for a janitor at an airport just for wearing an old coat. My father was denied entry to first class because he was speaking Spanish. Thank you, sir. You spoke for all of us." Elias sat as still as a rock in a churning sea of people. But his face was no longer cold. His eyes gradually brightened, as if he had confirmed something he had long suspected: the world still has people who will listen, as long as someone dares to begin. Lena leaned in and asked, "Aren't you angry after what they did to you?" Elias smiled faintly, his eyes still on the flight information display. Anger flares up and then dies down. But silence at the right moment can create something that anger cannot change. Lena nodded. She said nothing more, but her eyes were red. At the same time, Virion Airlines' internal alert system flashed red, a sudden spike in searches for Elias Grant and Virion discrimination. The stock market began to react. Virion's stock dropped 1.3% in just 20 minutes. Local television stations sent crews to the airport. Gate D12 was no longer the scene of an administrative error. It had become a symbol of an unjust system, exposed by the composure of a man who had been silent for too long. The truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. 3:12 p.m. A 53-second video was shared by an anonymous account claiming to be an employee in Virion Airlines Operations Department. The clip clearly showed the name tag, the images, and the true identity of Elias Grant. On the screen was a photo of an old internal file in which Elias was the founder, the airline's first chairman, under the heading "Founding Vision Dignity in Flight." In just 9 minutes, that image had spread through internal groups, employee forums, and then to the press. A tweet with over 50,000 shares read, "They just kicked the founder of their own airline out of first class." In the Virion Skies executive office on the 27th floor of the Chicago headquarters, advisors held an emergency closed-door meeting. CEO Avery Layton walked into an atmosphere as heavy as lead. On the large screen was a photo of Elias sitting at gate D12, his eyes somber but steady. Next to the caption, "The man who built the wings, now told he can't board." Avery raised a hand to stop the discussion. "The meeting is over. Solutions, now. Get me a direct, public line to gate D12. I will speak to all the passengers." "Are you sure?" an assistant asked. "If you admit fault, the media will blow it up even more." Avery replied, without hesitation. "A mistake isn't what kills a company. The denial of that mistake is what brings it down." 3:26 p.m. Gate D12. A female voice echoed from the airport's PA system. All passengers of flight Virion 702, please remain at the gate. The CEO of the airline will be making a live announcement. Everyone was stunned. Lena turned to Elias. He just gave a quiet nod, as if he knew this would happen, not because he wanted it to, but because the system had no other choice. A small screen at the gate displayed a live feed from the headquarters. CEO Avery Layton Young, dapper. His tie loosened, appeared with a grave expression. No script, no PR. Just a human being trying to mend a crack that had been widening for far too long. He looked directly into the camera and said, "I am Avery Layton, the current CEO of Virion Airlines. The man who was denied service at Gate D12 is no stranger. He is the founder of this airline. He is the reason we are here today. We were wrong, not because we didn't know who he was, but because we have forgotten how to see someone, without them having to prove their worth." Behind Elias, the entire area was dead silent. A few passengers lowered their heads. Gazes began to shift, no longer looking at him as someone unusual, but as a mirror reflecting their own conscience. Avery continued, his voice firmer this time. "We are conducting a full review of the entire chain of events. All staff involved in the process of denying Mr. Elias, whether intentionally or unintentionally, will be suspended pending an investigation into their capabilities and service attitude. And finally, I want to say this to Mr. Elias. If he is still listening, we are not asking for your forgiveness. We are asking to listen so we can learn how to do things right." The feed cut out. The crowd held its breath. 1 beat, 2 beats. Elias stood up. He didn't give a grand speech, didn't preach a sermon. He just turned to Lena and said quietly, "Do you still have your phone? Call them. Tell them to put it on speaker. I'm going to talk." Lena nodded, quickly connecting to the direct line to the airline's board meeting. Elias took the phone. His voice was low, clear, and echoed throughout the waiting area. "You have built more routes, but you forgot to rebuild dignity. You have designed more business-class cabins, but you have distorted the definition of kindness. I don't need to return to seat 1A. I need you to restore its true value for all those who have ever been rejected for not looking like a business-class passenger. Because if I, the man who wrote the first standards for this airline, can still be doubted, then what chance do the poor, the disabled, the people of color ever have of being trusted?" No one spoke after that, but everyone felt something within them awaken. A system had just been pierced, not with a hammer, but with a thin yet deep cut from the very heart it had long forgotten. The storm was no longer a hidden undercurrent. It had become a media earthquake. And at the very center of that earthquake, Elias Grant emerged, with no title, no bodyguards, no applause, just the presence of a man who had lived long enough to understand that an introduction is only necessary when one hasn't lived authentically enough. 3:41 p.m. The airport operations room announced Flight Virion 702 is delayed indefinitely. But no one left. People didn't stay for the airport. They stayed because something was being repaired, for the first time right where it had once broken. Elias stepped up to the announcement podium at gate D12, a place normally used only to call late passengers. Lena stood by his side, helping to connect the audio to the entire concourse. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at real people, the passengers, the staff, the cleaners who had stopped their mops to look up, the children clutching teddy bears, watching intently. His voice rang out, not loud but clear. "I am Elias Grant. I don't need a business card, because if I need one for people to treat me with kindness, then that kindness has no value." No one moved. Phones were held high. A few people were crying. "I founded Virian Skies with a simple philosophy: everyone deserves to be welcomed. Not for their appearance, not for their income, not for their accent or skin color. But today, I was asked to leave seat 1A not because of a system error, but because of an error in the eyes of those who have forgotten that." A media supervisor for the airline received an update. Over 3 million concurrent views were happening across various platforms. The hashtag #respect1A had surpassed even #breaking news within an hour. On CNN, a breaking news alert: airline founder faces discrimination on his own flight. Elias looked out at the crowd. His eyes were no longer tired as before. They were bright, not because of the unexpected fame, but because the world had been willing to stop and listen. He continued, "I'm not standing here to demand justice for myself. I'm standing here for the thousands of people who have been told they were in the wrong seat just because they weren't wearing the right color, didn't speak the right way, or didn't wear the right shoes. The truth doesn't need an introduction. It just needs not to be trampled on every day." Avery Leighton, Virian's CEO, listened via a live feed from his office. He looked out at the balcony, where people below were stopping to watch Elias's speech on a large LED screen. An assistant asked softly, "How should we respond?" Avery replied, his voice heavy, "We don't respond. We listen, and then we act." Elias lowered his voice, but each word seemed to strike the floor. "I don't want my seat back. I want you to give that seat back to all the people who are silently robbed of it by prejudice every day. I don't want an apology. I want a real reform plan. No more quiet dismissals, no more apology emails. I want change that has a name, a deadline, oversight, and a commitment." He turned to Lena, who was still holding the phone, transmitting his voice to the board of directors. He looked into the camera and then said directly, "I demand an internal hearing within 24 hours, with the entire leadership present, with customer representatives, and with the press, if necessary. I don't need you to prove you are right. I need you to dare to look at what is wrong." Silence enveloped gate D12, but it was no longer the silence of indifference. It was the silence of people who knew they were witnessing something irreversible, one person making an entire corporation, an entire industry. Stop and listen. Not because the old man was loud, but because he didn't need to introduce himself. The truth standing beside him was more than enough. Elias Grant never wanted to be a symbol. He once told his old staff in 2007, "True justice doesn't need heroes. It just needs people calm enough to hold their ground when the whole world tells them they're in the wrong place." Today, at gate D12, he did just that. He held his seat both literally and figuratively and let an entire system crash into the very things it had forgotten. 4:08 p.m. CEO Avery Layton opened an emergency internal meeting with the leadership via Zoom. The connection was global from New York to Zurich. On the projection screen, the video of Elias's speech was replayed for the third time in less than an hour. An operations director, his voice trembling. "Can we request a private meeting with him, away from the cameras?" Avery shook his head. "There's no more privacy, no more backstage. This is the time to step into the light." Within 24 hours, the 5 conditions proposed by Elias were approved in a special session attended by the largest shareholder representatives, the legal counsel, and independent customer monitors. And no one objected. Not because they feared the media, but because, for the first time, they understood doing nothing is also a choice, and it is the most dangerous one. Elias received the restructuring proposal that same evening. A young employee, Luca, who had received an aviation law scholarship from him in 2010, was now the airline's senior legal counsel and had drafted the proposal himself. The first line of the memo was in italics, stating clearly, "Passenger Grant is not requesting special privileges, he is demanding principles." And below were the 5 conditions that had been accepted: immediate termination of all directly involved personnel, including head flight attendant Brianna and Captain Rhodes, no internal transfers, no evading responsibility, mandatory completion of the Dignity First training course for all frontline staff within 30 days, a program designed by Elias himself with independent experts. Establishment of an anonymous internal prejudice reporting and complaint system, directly linking passengers to an independent monitoring board. Creation of a $500,000 Seat 1A fund to sponsor fairness initiatives in the aviation industry, including scholarships, training, and support for victims of discriminatory behavior. 20% of the executive board's quarterly bonuses to be tied to improvements in passenger fairness metrics and to be made publicly transparent. When Avery sent the confirmation email to Elias, his reply was brief. "Good. Do it. And don't use my name on television. This isn't about me." But things had already gone beyond his wishes. The press called him the nameless man in Seat 1A. TikTok videos of him filming his ticket reached 8 million views. CNN, the BBC, and even Al Jazeera all reported simultaneously a calm action, a response without shouting, a system forced to change. At the airport the next day, a group of young flight attendants gathered to stick a quote from him behind the flight information board. "No one is in the wrong seat if they arrive with kindness." It wasn't a slogan. It was a reminder. Elias still refused all interviews. But when Lena sent him a photo of a group of students who had started a #Gate D12 movement to document cases of prejudice in travel, he simply messaged, "I don't build movements, but if it needs a foundation stone, I won't refuse." And so, he who never wanted to be a role model, who never hoped to have his name written in history, had accidentally become a symbol for something the entire aviation industry had forgotten for too long. Respect is not a gift reserved for the prominent. At the launch, Lena stood on a simple podium, holding an old, worn airplane ticket, Elias's printout from the day he was removed from seat 1A. She held up the ticket and said, "This is the ticket that made an entire industry look at itself. But what is more memorable is not the seat on the ticket. It's how one person held his position in the heart of kindness, even when an entire system told him he was wrong." Below, hundreds of students, passengers who had been victims of discrimination, and even the retrained airline staff, quietly bowed their heads. Lena told the story of her first email to Elias. "I didn't want to start an organization. I just wanted a place where people like my mother, who was once forced off a plane for speaking Arabic, could tell their stories without being ridiculed." Elias had replied with a single line, "Then start by listening, not judging, and never let the door open only for those who fit the standard." The next day, Lena received a package. Inside was an economy-class airplane ticket, the sender's name, Elias Grant. On the back of the ticket was a handwritten note, "The seat doesn't matter. The person sitting in it is what makes it memorable. And I believe you will turn any seat into a place where kindness is never out of place." Gate 36 launched the Reverse Journey program, in which students would fly with the elderly, the disabled, or people who had never been on a plane before, to document their experiences and evaluate service attitudes objectively. Each participating passenger was given a special card bearing a quote, "Respect is not a reward. It is the minimum condition for people to fly together." Elias still did not appear at the launch ceremony, but in Chicago, at a small cafe next to the old terminal where he began his career, he was seen sitting quietly, looking up at the flight information display, his eyes shining with something close to peace. A young employee approached and asked, "Where are you headed, sir?" Elias smiled. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just watching to see if, after all this, people still have room for each other." 2 months after the Gate D12 event, at the National Transportation Justice Conference in Memphis, Tennessee, a gathering of hundreds of CEOs, activists, engineers, pilots, and even janitorial staff, Elias Grant was invited as the honorary speaker. He walked onto the stage in a simple suit, with no insignia, no introducer, no background music. On the large screen behind him, there was only a single line of white text on a black background. "Leadership isn't about being followed. It's about standing still when others walk away." He brought no script. He didn't look at the camera. He just looked straight at the front row, where a group of high school students was watching in silence. One of them wore a tag, "First Class of the Gate 36 program." Elias began, "I used to think change came from power. But then I sat down in seat 1A and realized sometimes the greatest power is when you don't need to prove anything at all. I'm not standing here as a founder or a witness. I'm just a passenger, someone who was once told, 'This seat is not for you.'" He paused. The space was utterly still. "We have built very good systems, placing the right people in the right places, but we forgot to teach them how to see others as human beings. I didn't come here to inspire. I came here to remind you, you don't need to be a hero. You just need to be awake at the right time. The speech ended. No thunderous applause, no cameras rushing forward. Only a 12-year-old girl came up and handed him a small piece of paper. The scrawled handwriting read, "You didn't teach me to be big. You taught me to do what's right, even if I'm the only one standing still." Elias smiled, bowed his head in thanks. Then he quietly left the stage, heading for a side exit. No one saw him off. No one interviewed him. There was only one thing a flight attendant whispered to her colleague as she watched his retreating figure. He didn't go viral. He went into the system and woke it up. A few weeks later, at gate D12, the place that was once a wound there was now a small metal plaque on the wall. This gate once closed on someone who opened a new future for us all. Welcome to Gate 36, where dignity is not optional. The story ends here, not with a punch, but with a quiet nod from a man who had learned not to leave his seat, even when everyone else told him he should stand up, and sometimes. That's how revolutions begin.